she really was this inspirational human being, and these are tears of happiness. Like I'm remembering our time there, and it just was pure magic. Like our childhood was as magical as it could be. And I don't think there is one student that attended that school that could honestly say that they did not feel that magic, because it was there. And I hope I still hold some of that magic in me, because Miss Morrison as an adult never ever lost it. And she was really very special, and she deserves as many accolades, awards, and praises as possible, because she changed the lives of so many people. And I'm so happy and honoured to have met her and to have been part of that school. I honestly feel that Miss Morrison knew I did not like ballet. I kind of trudged through the movements of the class, but I did enjoy going to Miss Morrison's, and she was very strict. She was quite strict, but at the same time, she had a way about her that made you love her. And she was able to make every single girl and boy in the class, every single student, she was able to make them feel special. She was able to bring out the best in them. And I really know that's what makes an excellent dance teacher. She was able to focus on their strengths. I wasn't a technician at all, and I didn't actually think I was very good, but she was able to make me perform and do characterization and do other forms and styles of dance, national dance, character dancing. I won medals for them, so I must have been half decent. And she was able to bring out the best in me, and she was able to do that with everyone. And I honestly feel she knew I did not like ballet. And so when it came to her annual shows and competitions, she gave me other roles other than ballet performances to partake in. She gave me speaking parts. Oh, and I loved them. And I think it's why I actually ended up doing acting, why I went on to use my voice and use my inner emotion of performance. She brought that out in me. And when I got cast in the James Bond film and it came out, I was so happy to tell her, because I knew that she was part of that success, of why she made that happen. And I remember telling her in person, but I think she already knew. And it was wonderful, because it was a real pat on the back to her too. Now, anyone that attended Miss Nora Morrison's school had so many beautiful costumes, because we were the best dressed children in terms of theatre in Nottingham. We had our costumes made by a few people. I'll remember clearly. Philippa Harris was a student at the school, and her mother, Mrs. Harris, made beautiful tutus and costumes. And of course, Miss Tess Morrison was the sister of Nora Morrison, and she was a fantastic seamstress. She was the best, she really was. And she actually encouraged my mother to make costumes for the school too, because my mother had some talent in terms of sewing. So my mother became one of the costumiers too of the school. And I remember, I would think I was 10 years old, and she had to make us a costume, and she had to make, I think it was 200 costumes in 2 weeks. And I remember watching her. She bought this overlocking machine, and she had her setup in her bedroom, and she made 200 costumes step by step over 2 weeks. And I remember the stacks in our house, and our house was always covered with bits of thread everywhere, because we had so many threads and fabrics and costumes being made when it was showtime. So not only at the dance school were we so busy and so involved with this school and with these shows, but at home we were so involved too. And it was wonderful. And we weren't the only family like that, because there were other families that and other parents that were making costumes. So I want to talk about Miss Tess Morrison. She was Nora's sister. And I was quite scared of her, actually. She was quite fierce, and she was very, very strict, and she had to be. She really was running this school for Miss Morrison. As much as Miss Morrison was the dance teacher, and she was the image and the talent for the children and for the music and what have you, she was the driving force too of this school behind the scenes. She was a talented seamstress and costume maker, Miss Tess. And Miss Tess was the one that managed the money because Miss Morrison would have taught for free, I think. She just didn't deal with the money side of things. It just wasn't her job. And Miss Tess, that was down to Tess. And Miss Morrison needed Miss Tess. And the two of them together are what make the Nora Morrison School of Dance. Without Miss Tess, I don't think there is a school quite like Miss Morrison's. So Miss Tess is very, very important at this school. She's a big part of it. No Miss Tess, no Nora Morrison School. That's what I think, at least. But I was quite scared of her because she was quite fierce. But she did have a soft side too, because we would take her home every single Wednesday night. And I always used to look forward to it because she used to run a little sweet shop too. Oh, that's a big part of the school too. She had a sweet shop where she would get a bit of extra cash. And every Wednesday she would give us some free sweets for our mother taking us home. So I always used to look forward to that. And she was so sweet when she handed over the packet of crisps or the sweets. It was nice. So I'm the middle of three sisters, Angela, Rachel and Rebecca. I was born in the Philippines and both my sisters were born in England. So my father's English and my mother is Filipino. Now we are first generation half Filipinos growing up in Nottingham at the time, in the 80s. There's no one around like us. If there are, there are very few of us. And I know the half Filipinos that were around. So here we are at Miss Morrison School, being the only half Asians there to start with. And when we came along, she loved it. It suddenly gave her this opportunity to use us and to bring everyone in to do all these different sorts of Asian and Oriental dancing. It was superb. We were doing Thai dancing. We were even doing Philippine dance. We were doing so many different national dances. We did Balinese dancing. We learned how to do all these different sorts of dance. And I have no idea where Miss Morrison learned to dance Balinese or Thai, but somehow she was able to teach it to us. And we won medals and awards when we attended competitions around the country. We went to Nottingham festivals, we went to Scunthorpe and Tamworth and Northampton. It was such a big part of our lives. And we loved it. It was so much fun. The winning we loved, and the losing. It was a great way to learn that we couldn't always win everything either. But Miss Morrison always did very, very well at competitions. And we stood out. Her school would stand out at these festivals. And it was such a wonderful, it was so wonderful to travel around England, to see all these different locations in England and to put up these shows. It really was a wonderful part of our childhood. Miss Morrison gave me my first speaking role in one of her shows that she wrote and composed. It was called Priscilla's Children, and it was about this lady called Priscilla, and she adopted all these children, and I was one of them. And I remember it so nicely. And so from that time onwards, after attending Miss Morrison's school, I knew I wanted to perform, not ballet, but I knew I wanted to perform. And to this day, I still perform. I love to act. and I love to be in front of the camera. I love to be on stage. I really do. And I love musical theatre. I still love to sing. And yes, to this day, Miss Morrison School has not left my heart. It still exists. She still lives in me. And I know she lives in my sisters and in many of the children that attended her school. Hundreds and thousands of them. Literally, she was teaching for decades. Now, a big part of Miss Morrison's school were the annual shows. In fact, I think a lot of people attended this school for these shows because we would rehearse for weeks and weeks and weeks, and then we'd put on this extravaganza, and it wouldn't be just for one night, it would be for a week long. And it was fabulous. We performed at the Nottingham Co-op Arts Theatre, which was a week-long show, and we would perform in October. And then we'd put on a one-day show the following year in March. Gosh, I remember that so clearly. At the Playhouse. Of course, that's a much bigger theatre and a lot, quite well known. So a show at the Nottingham Playhouse was quite a big deal. But we'd do the first show at the Co-op Arts Theatre, which is a beautiful theatre, and it would be a week long. And we would work so hard for weeks, doing so many different dances in this show that Miss Morrison, every single year, not only was she a talented teacher, she was a talented composer and writer. She would write I would say like a 3-hour show herself, compose music with Miss Reby Gearth, who was a brilliant composer herself and pianist, fantastic. And they would put on these shows. I would say Miss Morrison composed hundreds and hundreds of songs and so many different musicals. She was so talented. Whew. She worked hard. So we would put on these shows and it was an amazing experience. We would put on makeup and we'd have so many costumes. We'd have like 8 or 10 numbers per show. And it was so exciting. We would work hard, so night rehearsing, sometimes till 10:30. And I know she taught just so much more than dance, because when we meet up, all the former pupils, when I see any of the former pupils, they all know how to present themselves. They're all beautifully groomed. And she taught that. We learned so much at her dance school. And that teamwork, that working as a team and putting on a show and all that hard work of creating this big project, putting it together over weeks and then performing it, doing that had a tremendous, tremendous impact on me and my sisters as children. Just having a project that you work at it so hard for weeks and to the very, very end. It really was wonderful for us as children to have that in us. And at school, we did the same. Our projects that we did at school, we worked at projects, and the grades that we got, I feel that her school, she instilled that in us. She made us work that much extra, that much more and harder to get good results. You always were taught to try your very, very best and more at Miss Morrison's. And that was key to her success in teaching us that. And I really, really appreciate that from Miss Morrison. I truly, truly do. And I know it just wasn't us. She taught that to so many of her pupils. So many of her pupils opened dance schools afterwards, after being with Miss Morrison. It is such a hard job to open a dance school. And I know because my sister Angela opened a dance school. She has around, I think, 350, 400 students, and it's not easy. You have to deal with the students and the mothers and all the shows and everything. It's so very, very difficult, and so many of her students have been able to do that. And she really has been wonderful for so many people. She has transformed so many lives. She's really been a good service to humanity, to Nottingham, to England, and I live in New York, so here I am trying to do the Miss Morrison thing still. So we put on these school shows, and the proceeds would go to the Blind Society, the Nottinghamshire Royal Society for the Blind. I think it's changed names quite a few times. It's been the Blind Institute. And Miss Morrison has donated hundreds and thousands of pounds to the society over the decades. So she'd always donated to the blind school. It's a place that was very close to her heart. And it's also a place where she taught herself. She was very, very talented in teaching dance to the blind, to the deaf, those with disabilities. She did tremendous, tremendous work with that. And I know about her work with the blind because at one point, after I'd left the school, I decided to apply for a Queen's Honour for Miss Morrison. So I did a lot of research on her life and uncovered things that I never knew and most people never knew about Miss Morrison. Now, I never went on to perform ballet as a professional ballet dancer, but I will say this, I did dance ballet professionally, so I must have been half decent, I must have been quite good. I did dance ballet professionally. I toured the world. I worked for a Japanese company as a model doing ballet on stage with my hair adorned and dressed. And in that time, I did 3 solos, ballet solos, at the Royal Albert Hall. Well, there you go. I did a ballet solo at the Royal Albert Hall. And this is coming from somebody who attended Miss Morrison's school, who really wasn't very good at ballet, at least didn't think they were, and didn't really enjoy it. But I loved doing the ballet at the Royal Albert Hall. And I'm really happy to say that I got the opportunity to do that. Thank you, Miss Morrison. Thank you so much, Miss Morrison. Attending Miss Morrison's school completely changed our lives as 3 sisters. We are all in the world of performing, and I've picked a career in acting and in performance. I've been lucky enough to perform all over the world, on stage and in front of the camera. I've had numerous jobs in TV shows, and I've even been in a James Bond film. I'm a bona fide Bond girl, and I appeared opposite Pierce Brosnan in Die Another Day. And that was just so wonderful. And then eventually I moved from London to Los Angeles, California. And it's interesting, when I moved away from London, I had this inner calling. I can't explain it. It just kept coming to me every single day. Every single day. It just kept like eating away at me. It was really strange. I had never ever had that before. And something inside me was telling me to nominate Miss Morrison for a Queen's Honour. So I took up this task to nominate Miss Morrison for an MBE. Whew, it took me 2 years because I learned so much about her and there was so much to uncover. And the process for the Queen's Honours application is quite tricky. There's a lot of information and evidence you need to gather. And I also learned that Miss Morrison had been nominated for a Queen's Honour a few times before, and all her applications had failed. So I knew that whatever application I put forward to the office, the Queen's office, had to be 150% without a doubt that she needs to get this, because she deserves it. If anyone on this planet deserves a Queen's Honour, no joke, she deserved it. So I knew I needed to get the top people to write letters on her behalf to get this application through, and so that she could be awarded this honour. Whew. And so we had so many people respond. I had the Lord Mayor of Nottingham, he said yes. I had the Nottingham Evening Post, yay, they said yes. They all gave in these letters. I had former pupils from the Royal Academy of Dance, from Michael Stoico to all sorts of people. I had the creative artistic director of the Grey Theatre Company. She had just, Jenny Seeley, she had just choreographed she was choreographing the Olympics. I think she did it I think the Olympics was 2012. So she also sent in a letter for Miss Morrison's application. We got so many support letters. It was wonderful to see so many people willing to support Miss Morrison's Queen's Honour. Now, what's funny is that I wrote to the RAD, I wrote to the head of the RAD, I forget his name, it was a man, and I asked for a letter of support because Miss Morrison had received quite a few awards and recognitions with the Royal Academy of Dance, because she was one of their oldest teachers ever, Royal Academy of Dance teachers. She received the prestigious President's Award from the Royal Academy of Dance. So I wrote to the Royal Academy highlighting all these kind of mentions, and that he should support, and they should support Miss Morrison's nomination. And I got a letter back, and they actually said no. They said no on one reason. They said that they understood Miss Morrison was this wonderful teacher and blah, blah, blah. She deserves it, but they didn't want to support, they didn't want to start supporting teachers to encourage, I forget what it was. They just didn't want to support every single teacher that requested this support. How can I say? So after I got this rejection from the Royal Academy of Dance about supporting Miss Morrison's nomination, they said no. I decided to do a Miss Morrison back, because Miss Morrison taught us and taught me to never give up. The show must go on, and you have to try again. So I decided to write to the Royal Academy of Dance again, and I said to them that I did not accept no from them, and that they should support Miss Morrison's nomination. And I said that she deserved it. I highlighted that she stood out more than just other teachers. She just wasn't some random teacher that we were nominating. And I said, you should support her. And guess what? I get a letter back, and they agreed to support Miss Morrison's nomination. So I put forward Miss Morrison's nomination to the Queen's office, along with so many fantastic letters. Now, you're only supposed to send 6 letters to the nomination, or 5, I think, or maybe less, I don't know. But I sent 10 fantastic letters, along with lots of evidence, lots of newspaper clippings. And a few months later, Miss Morrison's name was listed on the Queen's Honours list, and it was wonderful. I think it was it 2012 or 2011? But all I remember is Miss Morrison and I went to Buckingham Palace to receive her MBE. And it was one of the most happiest days of not just my life, but her life. She really was so thrilled with this award, and she deserved it. It was basically, it brought all those years of hard work all in one. And I know for her it meant so much. She hung on to that medal. It was so important for her to have that. And I'm so happy. It's one of the best things I ever did. All that hard work so that she could get that award. That's the least I could do for her. And I'm so happy she got it. It really was wonderful. She got to meet the Queen. She deserved it. She deserved it, and more. She really did. She deserves so much more. And I hope one day in Nottingham, there's a statue or a dedication or something done in her honour, because everyone should remember somebody like Miss Morrison. I used to say that Nottingham doesn't have just one legend. It's not just Robin Hood. Nottingham has 2. We also have Miss Nora Morrison, and we should never forget her because she is a true legend. She really, really is. She's one of the reasons I truly believe why Nottingham thrives in the arts, because she was teaching for so many years. She really was. So I learned a couple of things when I was doing research for Miss Morrison's Queen's Honour. I learned that Miss Morrison started teaching at age 13. Now, I also know that from Miss Morrison because Miss Morrison used to tell us that she taught at age 13. And in fact, I did find a Dancing Times article which supports that. Miss Morrison was made an assistant teacher at the Betty Sissons School at age 13. Now, that sounds very young, but I think in those days, this was, I would not know what year it was. Was it late 20s? Maybe. In those days, people got jobs earlier, people weren't living as long, and of course, people got married early and had families early, so people started work earlier. Now, I know also from these newspaper articles that Betty Sissons was very, very young. She started her school when she was a teenager also, and she had this thriving school in Nottingham. She was very, very popular. She was very, very popular, Betty Sissons. And I learned this from newspaper articles I discovered. Betty Sissons passed away when she was 19 years old. She was very young. And I know this because in these old clippings, it talks of this funeral of this very popular dance school in Nottingham being attended by hundreds of people, including Betty Sissons' family. Apparently she had a brief illness that she didn't recover from, and sadly she passed away. That is so tragic. She was so, so popular, and a lot of children and families attended her funeral. So it was covered in the papers, so it must have been a big procession or a big funeral. So I know from the newspaper clippings that the school after Betty Sissons passed away continued to exist. So it seems that Miss Morrison, after Betty Sissons passed away, continued teaching at her school and continued to put on galas and shows, because there are newspaper articles that confirm this. It mentions that the Betty Sissons School put on a show and that the teacher was Miss Morrison, and the date is after Betty Sissons' passing. So that's very interesting. Now, at some point, I believe the Betty Sissons School became the Miss Nora Morrison School, because at some point the Betty Sissons shows were no longer mentioned in old clippings. Soon it's shortly after, like a few years after her death, it becomes the Nora Morrison School. So what I think happened, this is what I've concluded from what I've seen, and it's quite probable that Miss Morrison became a teacher at the Betty Sissons School. Betty Sissons sadly passes away. Miss Morrison continues to teach at the school, putting on Betty Sissons shows and galas for a few years. The school eventually becomes the Nora Morrison School of Dancing. Now, something interesting to note as well in the clippings, before Betty Sissons passes away, she's doing so many shows that are very, very popular in Nottingham. They are charitable shows, and the shows benefit the Blind Society, the Blind Institute. Betty Sissons has a connection to the Blind Institute. It's mentioned in some of the articles. And I believe Miss Morrison, because of Betty Sissons, continues to donate to the Blind Institute because of Betty Sissons. So that's a beautiful story. Now, Miss Morrison rarely spoke of Betty Sissons, but she did. And what Miss Morrison said of Betty was that she was this tremendous, inspirational teacher. And I think Miss Morrison continued with Betty's inspiration. It instilled something in Miss Morrison. She continued with Betty's School for a while. She continued donating to the Blind Institute. She continued with her charitable efforts. I know Betty Sissons was very charitable. Miss Morrison's continued teaching. She changed the name of the school to the Nora Morrison School of Dancing, and she continued teaching to the very end until she turned 97 years old. And what I learned from Miss Morrison, from her, she taught from age 13 to age 97. So how many years is that? That's 84 years of teaching continuously. She taught through the war also. Miss Morrison is the oldest and longest running dance school ever in the history of the world. And I actually remember trying to apply for a Guinness World Record for Miss Morrison. And I did the application. I actually called Guinness and sent some emails. And in fact, it wasn't possible because I needed real proof, and I needed more proof to show that she taught for that long, and they have certain stipulations, and I wasn't able to get that because she was teaching for so long and to such an old age that I wasn't able to prove that. But it doesn't matter because it's a fact that she taught for 84 years. 84 years! Can you imagine? 84 years and thousands and thousands and thousands of pupils, inspiration, inspiring so many children and literally changing the lives of so many. She is a wonderful, wonderful human being, and she changed so many lives. Everyone loved Miss Morrison. She made every single girl in that class and boy in that classroom feel so special. Miss Morrison brought out the best in every single child that she taught. She brought out the best in the parents too. And she just was a wonderful teacher. And I'm so thrilled that the dancing school is still being used. That hall today is still being used. And I'm thrilled that today that you've brought in so many different types of dance and national dance and drums and different music, because that is Miss Morrison. She was all about that. She was all about diversity. She was ahead of her time. She's ahead of the time now. She was all about diversity and bringing in everyone from around the world, the different music, the different looks, the different people, the different costumes. She was about that, and we loved her for that. I love her for that. So I mentioned I never really loved ballet, but it's so funny because I love it so much now. I really, really love it. And any opportunity to do an adult ballet class, I'll be there. And when I was pregnant, I have a 2-year-old daughter. When I was pregnant, it was during COVID, and my sister Angela taught ballet classes online for free during COVID. Not many people would do that, but Miss Morrison, I think, taught her to do things and taught us to do things, not always for things in return. But my sister Angela taught ballet for free during COVID because she felt it was a good thing to do during that time. And I always knew ballet was very good during pregnancy. So I attended many of my sister's ballet classes online while I was pregnant. So yay, I love my ballet class. Miss Morrison would be so thrilled to learn that her school today is being used as a dance school. It's still going on. And she'll be even more thrilled to know that it is a diverse dance school, that you have so many different people and different dances and instruments and music from around the world, whether it's belly dancing, free movement, ballet and drums. She would be so thrilled because that is what Miss Morrison was about. And she wanted every single child in that school to learn every single dance from around the world, whether it was flamenco, Hawaiian dance, Indian dancing, Philippine, Balinese dancing, Russian dancing. Every single one of us got a taste of what it was like to travel around the world. And she taught such beautiful things to children. The diversity, the inequality, the fact that everybody is the same, whether you're a man or a woman, a boy or a girl, wherever you're from, everyone is welcome. And that was one of the beautiful things about Miss Morrison. She really was a wonderful human being. She would be so thrilled to know that you are making wonderful music and bringing all sorts of dance into her room, and I want you to know that. Long live that atmosphere and that joy of Miss Morrison that she brought into every room that she stepped into. She really was a wonderful human being, and I really can't put it into words what kind of person she was. She brought a tear and a smile to every single person. Thank you, Miss Morrison. Thank you so much.
I am Peaceful Fountains of Desire, the masseuse. I come with compliments of the manager.
I'm sure you do. Come in.
On the bed, please. Face down.
Yes, of course.
I'm not that kind of masseuse.
I'm not that kind of customer.